Hello and welcome to the Herald's Facebook Live quick snap analysis of the budget, which Rachel Reeves just sat down, about an hour or so ago. My name is Andrew Learmonth. I'm the political editor of the Herald. I'm joined here by Ian McConnell, who's the business editor of the Herald.
Hi.
And quite a big budget, really, wasn't it? It was quite a lot in that one to unpick, Ian, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was plenty. I mean, there's obviously been an absolute slew of budgets, kind of autumn statements, spring statements, fiscal events, or whatever over the recent years with all the various kind of political changes. But that one did feel like a very big one, and some very, very big calls in terms of the tax rises, and increases in spending and investment.
Yeah. So I mean, she kind of started, because we were expecting some taxes to go up. I think the number we've been expecting was somewhere around 30 billion, and then she sort of quite early on said it was going to be 40 billion taxes raised because of measures in this budget. Some of those are quite controversial. I think the energy profits levy is certainly one that's going to be sort of controversial north of the border, and particularly in Aberdeen. She has raised it to 38%, and it's now going to be extended until 2030. Have we had much initial reaction to that so far, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction's a bit mixed on the energy profits levy. The rise to 38% had been sort of very well trailed, and it was clear where Labour stood on it. And there actually seems to have been sort of some relief that the kind of capital allowance element wasn't reduced, which I think is there's a view that that'll allow some near-term investment to go ahead. There was some comment on that from Wood Mackenzie, but I think sort of caveated with the fact that there's still a view that the energy profits levy is a kind of detrimental to the North Sea in general, kind of thing. But so I guess that was a little bit kind of mixed. Some of the sting was maybe reduced from what had been expected, or what had been expected at worst, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case. The national insurance, the employers' national insurance contributions was the big one that accounted for a £25 billion a year of tax take, which is a kind of huge amount. Obviously in the context of a budget that has received quite a lot of negative reaction already.
Well trailed as well. I mean, they kind of were expecting that, weren't we? But
yes, yeah, there was certainly kind of a rise in sort of employer NI was expected. It kind of emerged in the days in the run up. I suppose it's just looking at that kind of the stark kind of number of the for the take kind of thing, and the reaction on that. And then there's obviously been a debate as to whether that was in line with the manifesto pledge or not. The Labour sort of saying that they'd said that they wouldn't increase the taxes of working people, in terms of their taxes and their pay slip, and which they haven't done. But there's an argument that this employer's NI will feed through to employees ultimately. So that that's the other side of that argument. But yeah, I think there was one response from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, who was talking about picking the pockets of UK business or whatever, and the employers NI. So some of the reaction has been sort of predictably robust.
Yeah. And then the other big one for, I suppose, folk up here, the other big sort of tax measure was that duty on non-draft alcohol. So Scotch whiskey is going to go up by RPI, by inflation, next year. So we've already had the Scotch Whisky Association come out and saying, this undermines one of Labour's key missions, which was to promote brand Scotland.
Yes.
So I think they were expecting something. I'm not sure they were expecting this.
Yes, I mean, obviously over the years there's been kind of various kind of freezes, I guess, where that wasn't necessarily expected, kind of thing. There's been some surprising kind of good news on that front. It didn't materialise for the Scotch whisky sector this time round. Certainly, I think the argument of the Scotch whisky sector is that they are trying to lobby in terms of tax and kind of overseas territories, and then if the tax at home is high, it makes it more difficult to do that. It's also it's a major export industry, and as you say, sort of, brand Scotland obviously is kind of one of Scotland's most best known exports, kind of arguably the best known, with likes of salmon as well, kind of thing, in terms of the public mind kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. The other surprise, one of the big surprises for me, I think, was the freeze on fuel duty. I mean, the Chancellor stood up and she talked about, because the last budget, Jeremy Hunt cut it by 5p, and she stood up and said that this cost, I think, was going to cost 3 billion a year, and so
3 billion a year,
expecting there to go then, well, so we're going to get over it. But she didn't. She's frozen it again as well, which is an interesting choice, I suppose, a political choice there.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of mentioned, I guess, in the context of the kind of cost of living crisis. And as you say, the way it was set up, it looked like, it was talking about how it was 3 billion a year, a major commitment. And then, sort of, given the tone, you kind of fully expected the line that, under the current circumstances, that commitment couldn't be made, but then it was made. But I think that seemed to, again, tie in with this kind of, kind of working people cost of living crisis, not raising their VAT, income tax, their personal NI or whatever, and it all seems sort of chimed with that theme, I guess, to some degree.
And so during the statement, she said that the Barnett consequentials, as a result of her spending the budget, would see the Scottish Government's block grant increase by 3.4 billion, taking it to, I think, 47 billion, which I've just had a call with the Treasury in the Scotland office, just a briefing for journalists. They said it was the largest settlement in the history of devolution. But what they also said, which is quite interesting, is about levelling up funding. So there's 122 million pounds allocated for levelling up funding in the budget, which is the same number that was allocated last year in the budget, I think last November. And so a number of projects have already sort of started going here, but there's been a bit of uncertainty because there's always been this sort of, ever since Labour came in, they said they were going to put things into review. So I did a story a couple of months back on the Drum Chapel, this money that was being spent on the regeneration of Drum Chapel, and it was under review. And so we had this question and answer session with the Secretary of State and Darren Jones, who I think is Chief Secretary to the Treasury. They said, we asked, so what does this mean? Does this mean those projects are going to go ahead, or does it not? And the answer I think we got back was maybe not. So basically the rule of thumb looks like sort of projects where the boots were on the ground, where the shovels were in the ground, might continue, but we might have to wait until next year when there is this big spending review as well. So still I think some tricky times coming from the new Labour government. Anything else we should quickly touch on before we wrap this up?
I mean, I think what was quite interesting was that, there was obviously some very big moves there. There was some stuff from the, kind of, the opposition about the fiscal rules and, the increased borrowing and so on. What was interesting, I think, was striking was that the financial market reaction was kind of very benign. Obviously everyone focuses, everyone always focused on that to a large extent, but ever more so since that autumn 2022 budget from Truss and Kwarteng, where it, the things went kind of haywire kind of things. So I think Labour would have had a keen eye on the kind of financial market reaction. They obviously, made some very big moves and some big calls, but it seems to have been kind of, received calmly, which, is good for everyone, because it saves the kind of turmoil that we saw last time around, which then has a kind of real economy cost. So, yeah.
To quickly talk about growth, because I thought those were quite startling figures at the start there, where growth looks pretty anemic, really.
Yeah, I think the growth forecasts are kind of edged up in the near term, partly because the purse strings have been loosened a little bit. Kind of this year's 0.8 up to 1.1. Obviously, a lot of this year's gone already, so that had been sort of edging up anyway. I think next year is up from 1.9 to 2.0, but then each of the next 3 years are cut compared with the March 2024 budget forecast. And I think towards the kind of back end, you've got kind of 1.5, 1.6% in the last 3 years of the forecast, which are, I guess we're in kind of a new world, but certainly kind of, pre-global financial crisis, you were looking at a trend rate of 2.5% or 2.75%. You know, the world has changed, but even in the kind of changed world, those are kind of fairly, fairly sluggish growth figures, kind of thing.
So what happens now in terms of the budget is we have the Green Book. It's the Green Book, isn't it? I always forget the colour of the book is.
Red.
The Red Book. The Red Book. The Red Book. I knew it was a book. I knew it was a colour. And so that comes out now. People will be poring over it. We'll get all the analysis from all the think tanks and the economists and stuff like that. So that will come over the next couple of days, where the because it's always kind of the next day with the budget, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of from a very kind of quick look at there's obviously a lot of analysis, but the likes of the Institute for Fiscal Studies sort of gives a snap analysis, and then usually more in depth. But you know, from I suppose a quick look at the kind of Red Book and the the kind of ins and outs. I mean, there's not that many the famous last words, but a lot of it was kind of, announced in terms of the national insurance being the huge tax, take capital gains taxes about 2.5 billion. The energy profits levies, quite a bit less than that, which is, maybe a little bit surprising, but obviously reflects the capital allowance view as well, and so on. So yeah, but as usual in the kind of hours and days, there's plenty of detail that emerges beyond the speech kind of thing, which yes, we and others pour over, I guess.
Well, to keep up to date with all of that detail, make sure you keep it at heraldscotland.com, and we'll do our best to unpick and analyse and share all that with you. Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks very much for watching.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Cheers.